Have you ever wondered how far a person would go to protect a stranger? Have you ever asked yourself what it takes to stand when the world tells you to kneel? Have you ever felt that moment when fear says run, but your heart says fight? If you're curious, if you're ready, come with me. Let's discover the hidden truth behind a storm, a stranger, and a choice that changed everything. I was supposed to be a bride. Instead, I was running barefoot through the storm, a wedding dress clinging to my skin, soaked, heavy, tearing at every step. Mud and blood on my legs, my breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps. The wind screamed in my ears, cold rain lashing my face, mixing with the tears I couldn't stop. Behind me I heard the horses, hooves pounding, voices calling my name, promising to drag me back, promising to finish what they started. I ran faster. Branches tore at my arms, ripped lace from the dress, left thin red lines on skin already bruised where his hands had grabbed me hard when I said no. If you believe there's still good worth fighting for, type yes in the comments and hit subscribe. If you don't, hit like to prove me wrong. Lightning split the sky. Just for a moment, and I saw my reflection in a puddle, eyes wide with fear, hair plastered to my cheeks, a bride running for her life. I wanted to stop, to fall down and let the storm swallow me whole, but I couldn't. I couldn't let him catch me, so I kept moving, stumbling, my feet sinking in the mud, pulling free with a sucking sound, falling to my knees, getting up again. Then I saw it, a light. Flickering warm behind rain-streaked glass, alone in the darkness, a cabin at the edge of nowhere. A chance. I crawled the last few feet, knees scraping against the wooden steps, raised a shaking hand, knocked once, twice. The door creaked open, and then the world went black. When I was little, I used to dream about my wedding day. White dress, church bells, a man who would love me, a life that would feel like freedom. But the world doesn't care about little girls' dreams. It cares about debts, power, and the hands of men who think you belong to them. They told me it was a blessing, that I was lucky Clayton Voss wanted me, that my brother's debts could be cleared with one "I do," that a man like Clayton, who owned half the silver mines in Nevada, could have chosen anyone, but he chose me, like I was a prize pig at auction. My brother Tommy stood in the doorway that morning, tears in his eyes, whiskey on his breath. "I'm sorry, Evie," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." I wanted to hate him, but I couldn't because I knew he was just as trapped as I was. They dressed me in white lace, pinned my hair up with trembling hands. My reflection in the cracked mirror looked like a ghost. Clayton smiled when he saw me, a smile that never reached his eyes. His hand gripped my arm too tight as he led me to the carriage, whispering in my ear, "Don't even think about running." His fingers dug into my skin, leaving bruises shaped like his pride. The church was full of people who didn't care about me. They cared about what Clayton could give them. They cared about the power in the room, not the girl in the white dress. The preacher began to speak. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would break through my chest. I looked around for Tommy. They said he was indisposed, which meant Clayton had him locked away somewhere. Insurance. The words blurred. The preacher's voice turned to a buzzing in my ears. Clayton turned to face me, taking my hands. I could feel the calluses on his palms, the coldness of his skin. I tried to pull away. His grip tightened. "Smile," he hissed, and I snapped. I pulled away so hard the lace sleeve of my dress tore. I ran, down the aisle, past the shocked gasps and the angry shouts, out the doors and into the rain. The sky opened up, drenching me instantly, turning the dry dust of the street into rivers of mud. I ran. The dress caught on fences, tore, the hem dragging through puddles, soaking heavy against my legs. I could hear them behind me. Shouts, orders, horses being saddled, the hunt beginning. I ducked into alleys, climbed over fences, tore the veil from my hair and let it fall into the mud. My bare feet slipped, slid, toes raw, blood mixing with rain and dirt. I could hear Clayton's voice in my mind. "You belong to me." I found Tommy once. They had him tied to a chair in the back of the saloon, face swollen, eyes barely open. "Run," he croaked, blood on his lips. "Run, Evie." So I did. I ran until I couldn't see the town anymore, until the lights disappeared behind me, until the mountains swallowed me whole. The storm followed, lashing me with rain, wind screaming like a warning. I stumbled through brush, thorns tearing at my skin, the cold cutting deep. But the fear was worse than the cold. The fear that he would find me, that he would drag me back, that I would wake up in his bed, his ring on my finger, his hand on my throat whenever I tried to say no. I kept moving, even when I couldn't feel my feet, even when the mud sucked at my legs, pulling me down, even when every breath felt like knives in my chest. At night, I hid under trees, wrapping the torn dress around me for warmth that never came. I listened for the sound of hooves, for the laughter of men who hunted women like foxes, for the snap of branches that meant they were close. Sometimes I thought I saw Tommy's face in the dark, telling me to keep going. Sometimes I thought I saw my mama's face, crying because she couldn't save me. When the dawn came, it was gray and cold. I was shaking so hard I could barely stand. The dress was no longer white. It was mud and blood, a reminder of everything I'd lost, of everything I was running from. And then I heard them. The horses, hooves pounding against the wet earth, voices calling my name, mocking, hungry. "Evie, come out, sweetheart. You can't run forever. You belong to him." I ran. I ran until the forest thinned, until the trees opened into a clearing, and I saw it. A cabin, alone in the wilderness, smoke rising from the chimney, a single light in the window. I fell to my knees, crawled the last few feet, my hands sinking into the mud, nails cracking against rocks. Lightning flashed, and in that moment, I saw the porch, the steps, the door. I reached for it, raised a hand that shook so badly I could barely form a fist. I knocked once, twice. The third knock was softer as my strength left me. The door opened, light spilled out onto the porch, and I saw him. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, hair streaked with gray, eyes the color of steel. Holding a cup of coffee, steam rising into the cold air. His eyes widened as he saw me, the bride in the storm. I tried to speak, to beg, to ask for help. No words came out, only a sob, and then everything went black. I woke to the crackle of fire. The warmth hit me first, then the pain. My body felt like it had been beaten by the storm, every muscle sore, every bruise screaming as I shifted. I opened my eyes slowly, wooden beams above me, the scent of smoke and coffee and something earthy, like leather and rain-soaked earth. A blanket scratched against my skin, rough but warm. I was alive, alive. For a moment I let that sink in. Then I remembered, the wedding dress, the storm, Clayton. I sat up too fast, the world spinning, and clutched the blanket to my chest. My heart slammed against my ribs as I took in the small cabin around me. A fireplace against one wall, flames dancing, spitting tiny sparks. A table, rough-hewn, with a tin coffee pot steaming. A window where the rain streaked down in thin rivers. And him, sitting in a chair by the window, a rifle resting across his knees, watching me. His eyes were steel gray, like the storm outside, but not unkind. Weathered skin, a beard flecked with gray, shoulders broad enough to block out the world. He didn't speak at first, just watched. I pulled the blanket tighter, the memory of cold rain and Clayton's hands flooding back. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. My throat was raw, burned from screaming into the wind. I tried again. Where am I?" It came out as a whisper. He didn't move, didn't blink. "My ranch," he said, voice low, a little rough. "Middle of nowhere, which I reckon is exactly where you were trying to get to." My eyes darted to the window. The storm was still there, but softer now, rain tapping instead of lashing. I saw my wedding dress hanging near the fire. Torn lace, mud stains, steam rising as it dried. Shame burned in my cheeks. I pulled the blanket higher, feeling small, exposed. My dress. "You were soaked through," he said, cutting me off gently. "Figured you'd rather not freeze to death while unconscious." His voice was steady, calm. I wanted to believe it was safe here, but I knew better. Nowhere was safe. I tried to stand. The room tilted. The cabin floor rushed up to meet me. But before I fell, he was there. Moving fast, catching me with one strong arm, steadying me. "Easy," he murmured. I flinched at his touch. He let go instantly, stepping back, hands raised. "Easy," he repeated. I looked up at him, at the lines on his face, the weariness in his eyes, the careful distance he kept. And for a moment, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Not desire, not ownership, not danger, just concern. "I need to go," I whispered, backing away. "Storm's not done yet," he replied. "I can't stay." "You can't leave." His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a finality. I shook my head, tears burning in my eyes. "You don't understand. They'll find me, and they'll kill me for running, or worse." His jaw tightened, his eyes darkened. "Who?" I swallowed, tasting salt and fear. "Clayton Voss." The name was poison on my tongue. His eyebrows lifted just slightly. "I know that name." "Then you know I can't stay." "I know he's a bastard who thinks money buys him anything." His voice was colder now, steel under the calm. I hugged the blanket tighter, trembling. "I don't want to bring trouble here. I'll leave. You're not leaving." He stepped back, sitting down again, picking up the rifle, checking it with practiced hands. "You'll stay until you're strong enough to walk." "And then what?" I snapped, fear turning sharp in my voice. "When they come, when they find me, what then? They'll burn this place down, they'll kill you." He didn't look up. "That's my concern." The rain picked up again, wind howling through the gaps in the shutters. Lightning flashed, illuminating his face. Strong jaw, calm eyes. A man who had seen too much. A man who had lost too much. And for some reason, he was willing to risk himself for a stranger in a torn wedding dress. "Why?" I whispered. He glanced up. "Why what? Why are you helping me?" For a long moment, he was silent. Then he set the rifle aside, leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Because once," he said slowly, "someone came to me for help, and I failed them." His eyes drifted to the fire, the flames dancing in the reflection. "And I promised myself I'd never fail like that again." The silence between us was thick. I didn't know what to say, didn't know if I believed him, didn't know if it mattered, because the truth was, I had nowhere else to go. We sat in that silence, the storm raging outside, the fire crackling softly, me clutching a blanket like it was a lifeline, him sitting with that rifle, watching the door, the window, the dark, guarding me. I closed my eyes just for a moment, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt safe. Not safe from tomorrow, not safe from Clayton, but safe for that moment, in that cabin, in the middle of nowhere, with a stranger who was willing to stand between me and the darkness. I don't know how long I sat there listening to the fire crackle and the storm breathe against the windows. Long enough for the warmth to soak into my bones. Long enough to almost forget. Almost. Because you never really forget the sound of hooves in the dark. At first, it was just a feeling, a shift in the air, the hush of the storm changing, like the world holding its breath. Then came the sound, dull, rhythmic, thud, 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 growing louder, closer. I froze, clutching the blanket, eyes wide, staring at the door. He heard it too. Malachi's head lifted, eyes narrowing, jaw tightening. His hand moved to the rifle, fingers wrapping around the wood like it belonged there. Outside, the hooves kept coming. They found me. My voice was a whisper, a ghost in the room. He didn't look at me, didn't need to. I know. He stood, moving to the window, pulling back the edge of the curtain just enough to look out. His shoulders were tense but steady, like a man who'd faced storms before, like a man who'd stopped being afraid a long time ago. I wanted to run, to hide, to disappear, but there was nowhere to go, nowhere to hide, nowhere safe. "They'll kill you," I whispered. My hand shook as I pulled the blanket tighter, trying to make myself small. "You don't have to do this." He didn't answer, just kept watching the dark. Watching the shapes moving beyond the tree line, watching the men coming for me. The thunder of hooves stopped, silence, then the creak of saddles, the murmur of voices. I closed my eyes, pressing my lips together to keep from crying. And then I heard him. Clayton. Evangeline. His voice was smooth, confident, cold, like silk soaked in poison. Come on out, sweetheart. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be. I flinched at the sound of his voice. My heart slammed against my ribs, memories crashing over me, his hand on my wrist, the bruises, the promise in his eyes that he would own me one way or another. Malachi stepped back from the window, rolling his shoulders, lifting the rifle. You stay here. His voice was calm, but there was steel in it. He moved to the door, pausing, looking back at me. Our eyes met. And for a moment, I saw something there. A promise. A choice. He opened the door. The wind rushed in, cold and sharp, carrying the scent of rain and pine and horses. Malachi stepped onto the porch, the boards creaking under his boots. He stood tall, rifle resting against his shoulder, his silhouette framed by the lightning in the distance. Clayton sat on his horse at the edge of the yard, 4 men with him, all armed, their faces half hidden under dripping hats. They looked like shadows, predators. Evening, Thorne, Clayton called, tipping his hat, that cruel smile on his lips. Hell of a night, ain't it? Malachi didn't answer, didn't move, didn't flinch. I believe you have something that belongs to me, Clayton continued, voice still calm, still polite, like they were discussing the weather. Malachi shifted the rifle, letting it rest across his chest. She doesn't belong to you. The smile slipped, just a little. Clayton's eyes darkened. I'm afraid you're mistaken. She's not going anywhere with you. Malachi's voice was quiet, final. For a moment, the world was silent. Even the rain seemed to pause. Clayton chuckled, a sound that made my skin crawl. You think you can stop this, old man? You think you can stand in the way of me and what's mine? Malachi didn't answer, didn't move. Clayton sighed, shaking his head. Search the cabin. One of the men dismounted, mud splashing under his boots as he stepped toward the porch. Malachi shifted, the rifle lifted, the man stopped. I said no. Malachi's voice cut through the rain, sharp, clear. The man hesitated, looking back at Clayton. Clayton's jaw tightened, his hand dropped to the revolver on his hip. You're making a mistake. Lightning flashed, lighting up the yard, the horses, the guns. For a heartbeat, everything was clear. I pressed a hand to my mouth, tears burning in my eyes. He was going to die for me. A stranger. A man I'd known for less than a day, standing there, alone, against men who would kill him without a second thought, because I knocked on his door, because I ran, because I refused to be owned. Clayton's hand moved, fast, but Malachi was faster. The rifle roared, the sound shaking the walls, echoing across the trees. The man closest to the porch staggered back, clutching his shoulder, screaming. Chaos erupted, horses rearing, men shouting, guns being drawn. Malachi stepped off the porch, firing again. Another man fell. Clayton's face twisted with rage as he pulled his revolver, aiming. I screamed, but Malachi didn't stop, didn't slow. The gunfight was fast, brutal. Rain and gun smoke mixed, drifting in the wind, flashes of light, the crack of shots, the thud of bodies hitting the mud, and then it was quiet. Clayton was gone. Riding into the storm, 2 men left with him, one clutching a wound, the other looking back with fear in his eyes. They would be back. I knew it. Malachi knew it. He stood in the yard, rain dripping from his hat, rifle still in his hands, breathing hard, watching the darkness where they had disappeared. And then he turned. Our eyes met, and I saw it. He had chosen to fight, chosen to protect, chosen to stand for me. I stepped out onto the porch, the rain cold on my skin. The blanket fell from my shoulders, landing in the mud. I didn't care. I walked toward him, my bare feet sinking into the wet earth. He watched me, eyes tired but steady. I stopped in front of him. The rain fell around us. Why? I whispered. His eyes softened, just for a moment, because someone should have. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in my life, I felt safe. The rain washed the blood into the mud. The smoke drifted away, leaving the air sharp with the scent of gunpowder and wet earth, and we stood there, Malachi and I, in the middle of it all, breathing, alive. His eyes swept the clearing, scanning the tree line, the empty road where Clayton had vanished into the storm, checking, measuring, preparing for what came next. I was still shaking. Mud clung to my bare feet. My wedding dress, torn and stained, hung near the fire, half dry, half ruined. I didn't care. I couldn't take my eyes off Malachi, the man who had stood alone in the storm for me. He lowered the rifle, slowly, carefully, as if the world might shatter if he moved too fast. Then he looked at me. His eyes were tired, lines carved deep around them, but they were steady, alive. "Inside," he said quietly, and I followed him. The cabin felt smaller now. The warmth of the fire licked at the cold, clinging to my skin. I stepped over the threshold, leaving wet footprints on the wooden floor. Malachi shut the door behind us, locking it with a click that sounded too loud in the quiet. He leaned the rifle against the wall. His hands were steady, but I saw the way his shoulders dropped, just a fraction, as the weight of what he'd done settled into his bones. I sank down onto the floor near the fire, pulling the rough blanket around me again. I was still shaking. I didn't want him to see, but he saw. For a long while, neither of us spoke. The fire crackled, rain drummed against the roof, the wind sighed around the cabin, pressing against the walls like a restless ghost. Finally, he moved, poured coffee into a tin mug, walked over and crouched down in front of me. "Drink." His voice was soft, but it was not a request. My hand shook as I took the mug. The heat burned my palms, grounding me. I took a sip, bitter, strong, real. I closed my eyes. Tears slipped down my cheeks, hot against the chill still clinging to my skin. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "For what?" His voice was low. "For bringing this here. For making him fight. For making him a target. For pulling him into the darkness I thought I could outrun." "You didn't bring this," he said. His eyes met mine, gray and stormy and calm all at once. "They did." I shook my head, tears falling faster. "They'll come back." His jaw tightened. "I know. They won't stop. I know. They'll kill you." He was silent for a moment. Then he reached out, his hand rough and warm as it cupped the side of my face, wiping a tear away with his thumb. "Let them try." I let out a broken sound. Not a sob, not a laugh, something in between. Because for the first time, someone wasn't telling me to be quiet, to be small, to be afraid. For the first time, someone was saying, "Let them try." We buried the bodies at dawn. There were two. Men who had followed Clayton. Men who had chosen to hunt me. Men who would hunt no one ever again. The rain had stopped, leaving the world damp and silent. Mist clung to the trees, curling around the fence line like smoke. The ground was soft, mud sucking at our boots as we dug. Malachi worked in silence, his shovel rising and falling in a steady rhythm. I helped. My hands blistered, raw, but I didn't stop. I owed these men nothing, but the earth demanded to be closed over them. When we finished, Malachi stood over the graves, his hat in his hands, head bowed. I didn't know if he was praying. I didn't ask. We walked back to the cabin as the sun began to rise, pale and weak through the mist. Inside, the fire was still burning, the warmth reaching out to us as we stepped through the door. Malachi hung his hat on a peg, wiped the mud from his boots. I stood there, wrapped in the blanket, watching him, watching the way he moved, the way he carried himself, the way he was already checking the windows, the doors, the rifle, preparing, because we both knew this wasn't over. Clayton would come back, with more men, with more guns, and we would be ready. "I'll leave," I said suddenly. The words spilled out, sharp, desperate. "I'll run again. I can't let you—" "No." He didn't look at me as he spoke, his voice quiet but final. "You're not running anymore. I can't let you die for me." He looked at me then, really looked, and the firelight caught in his eyes, turning the gray to steel. "I'm not dying." I opened my mouth, but no words came. Because a part of me wanted to believe him. A part of me wanted to believe that this cabin in the woods, this man who stood in storms for a stranger, could be stronger than Clayton Voss, stronger than fear, stronger than the world. "Why?" I whispered. Why fight for me? His eyes softened, just a little. Because someone should have. That was the second time he'd said it, and this time, I understood. I sank down onto the couch, clutching the blanket around me, watching the fire. Watching the man who had chosen to fight. Watching the man who had chosen to protect. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Maybe death, maybe pain, maybe the end of everything. But for now, I was here. Alive. Safe. And I wasn't alone. Not anymore. We spent the next day fixing fences. It sounds simple, but it wasn't. The fence was old, weather-beaten, sections torn down by storms. Some boards snapped clean from when the horses had bolted during the gunfire. Malachi moved with steady purpose, hammer in one hand, nails in the other, his steps sure, measured, as if building something was the only way to silence the war in his mind. I followed him with a bucket of nails, handing them over one by one. The sky was clear, painfully blue after so many days of rain, and the earth smelled of wet pine and turned soil. For a moment, it was easy to pretend we were just two people tending to a ranch, not a runaway bride, not a man who had chosen to stand in the path of a monster like Clayton Voss. "You don't have to help," Malachi said, glancing at me over his shoulder. His eyes squinted in the sun, gray like river stones. "I want to." The words came out before I could think about them, and they were true. Because standing still felt like death. Because using my hands, even if they blistered and bled, felt like living. Because for the first time, I was choosing something. We worked in silence. Birdsong filled the air. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk called, gliding over the hills. My arms ached, my shoulders burned, but I didn't stop. At midday, Malachi handed me a tin cup of water. I drank greedily, water running down my chin, dripping onto the dirt. When I finished, I looked up at him. He was watching me. His gaze wasn't hungry, it wasn't possessive, it was human. Just a man seeing a woman who was trying, who was fighting, who was alive, and it made something crack open inside me, something that had been locked away since before the wedding dress, before the debts, before the fear. Hope. When we finished the fence, we returned to the cabin. I helped him stack wood for the fire, sorting pieces by size, wiping sweat and dirt from my forehead with the back of my hand. Malachi was quiet, focused, but every now and then his eyes would flick toward me, as if checking that I was still there, as if checking that I was still real. Inside, he set a pot of coffee on the stove, the scent filling the cabin, comforting, grounding. I sat on the floor near the hearth, pulling the blanket around my shoulders, watching the flames dance. He poured 2 cups, handed one to me. I took it carefully, letting the warmth seep into my cold fingers. We sat there, in the quiet, the fire crackling, the wind brushing against the windows. For a moment, it felt like the world had stopped. And then I asked the question that had been burning inside me. "Why did you leave?" His head turned, slowly, eyes meeting mine. "Leave what?" "Being a sheriff, being a lawman." His jaw tightened. His gaze dropped to the coffee in his hands. "It's a long story." "I've got time." The silence stretched, heavy. Then he spoke. 3 years ago, I was sheriff in a town south of here. Small place, but it had its share of trouble. His voice was quiet, but steady. There was a girl, 19, bright eyes, laughed like she didn't know the world could hurt her. He paused, staring into the flames. Her father owed money to the wrong man. That man came to collect, demanded the girl instead of payment. I felt my stomach twist. She came to me for help, Malachi continued, his voice rougher now, lower. Begged me to protect her. I promised I would. His hand tightened around the coffee cup. But money talks. The sheriff's office got bought. Evidence disappeared. Witnesses vanished. His eyes lifted, meeting mine, and I saw the pain there, raw and unhidden. They found her in the river. They called it a suicide. I didn't know what to say, didn't know how to reach across the space between us, so I just whispered, "I'm sorry." He nodded once, slow. "That's why I left. That's why I came out here." "To hide?" His eyes narrowed slightly. "To survive." The words hung in the air. Truth. pain, regret. I reached out, my hand trembling, and laid it on his. His skin was rough, warm. He looked at me, really looked, and I saw something shift in his eyes, a softening, a letting go. "You didn't fail her," I said quietly. His jaw tightened. "Yes, I did. You tried." He didn't respond. We sat there, hand in hand, the fire crackling, the cabin warm around us. The world outside felt far away. "Malachi," I whispered. He looked at me. "They'll come back, won't they?" "Yes." "And when they do?" He took a deep breath, his shoulders rising and falling like the tide. "Then we fight." And for the first time, I believed him. Because he wasn't running anymore. And neither was I. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and rain and something colder, the promise of coming trouble. But inside the cabin, it was warm, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the fight, because I wasn't alone. We didn't sleep much that night. The wind kept shifting, bringing with it the scent of rain, pine, and smoke. I lay on the couch, wrapped in the blanket, staring at the dark ceiling, listening. Every creak of wood, every rustle of branches outside, every sigh of the wind felt like a warning. Malachi sat by the window, rifle across his lap, eyes scanning the darkness, a sentry in the night. At some point I drifted off, dreamed of water, of a river carrying me away, pulling at the torn lace of my wedding dress. I woke to the sound of Malachi's boots on the wooden floor. He was moving quietly, checking the door, the windows, the locks, preparing. The dawn came gray and cold. No sunrise, just the sky turning from black to steel. Malachi handed me a cup of coffee. I wrapped my hands around it, letting the heat chase away the cold that had settled in my bones. He stood by the door, eyes distant, jaw tight. "They'll come today, won't they?" I asked. His eyes flicked to me, then away. "Yes." Outside, the world was still, too still. We spent the morning preparing. Malachi moved like a man who knew what he was doing, calm, quiet, focused. We barricaded the windows, leaving slits to see through, checked the doors, loaded the rifles, the pistols, stacked extra rounds on the table. At one point, I found him staring at a locket he pulled from his pocket. He snapped it shut before I could see what was inside, slipped it back into his coat. I didn't ask. Around noon, we ate in silence. Bread, jerky, dried apples. Neither of us tasted it. We didn't talk about fear. We didn't talk about dying. We didn't talk about what would happen if we lost, because there was no if. The wind picked up, carrying dust across the yard, rattling the shutters, and then we heard it. Hoofbeats. Malachi stepped to the window, parting the curtain with 2 fingers. His shoulders stiffened. "They're here." I moved to stand beside him. My heart slammed in my chest. Clayton rode at the front, his horse black, muscles rippling under expensive tack. Behind him, a dozen men on horseback, rifles, pistols, coiled ropes hanging from saddles like snakes waiting to strike. They stopped at the edge of the yard, the horses shifting, snorting. Clayton dismounted slowly, adjusting his gloves, looking around like he owned the world. And maybe he did, until today. Malachi opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. The wind caught his coat, snapping it around his legs. The rifle rested easy in his hands. I stood just inside the doorway, close enough to see, far enough to stay hidden if I needed to. Clayton smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Thorne," he drawled, tipping his hat. "We need to talk." Malachi didn't respond, didn't move. Clayton's smile widened. "Let's not make this difficult. Hand her over. She's mine." Malachi shifted the rifle, resting it against his shoulder. "She doesn't belong to you." The smile disappeared. Clayton's face hardened, jaw tightening. "You're making a mistake." Malachi didn't blink. "Maybe." The men behind Clayton shifted, hands dropping to weapons. Malachi's eyes flicked over them, counting, measuring. Clayton sighed, pulling off his gloves, tucking them into his belt. "I didn't want it to go this way." His hand dropped to his revolver. The world froze. I saw Malachi's finger tighten on the trigger. Saw Clayton's eyes narrow. And then everything happened at once. The rifle roared. Clayton stumbled back, a red bloom on his coat. Gunfire exploded from the yard. The porch splintered as bullets tore into the wood. Malachi fired again, working the lever smooth, precise. A man fell from his horse. Another dropped to a knee, screaming. I ducked behind the doorframe as bullets cracked past. My breath came in sharp, ragged gasps. The smell of gunpowder burned in the air. I peeked out and saw Malachi standing tall on the porch, firing, reloading, firing again. Clayton's men scattered, some dismounting, taking cover behind fence posts, rocks, the well. The horses screamed and bolted. The air was chaos, smoke, gunfire, screams. And through it all, Malachi stood. I saw Clayton on the ground, crawling, reaching for his revolver. Saw Malachi step off the porch, walking toward him. Step by step, gunfire cracking around him, but he didn't flinch. Clayton lifted the revolver, his hand shaking. Malachi raised the rifle. A single shot. Clayton fell back, the revolver dropping from his hand, his eyes wide, staring at the sky. Silence. One by one, the remaining men dropped their weapons. They backed away, mounted their horses, and rode. They left Clayton in the dirt, left the fear that had ruled them lying dead in the mud. Malachi stood over Clayton's body, breathing hard, the rifle lowered, the wind tugged at his coat, and then he turned and looked at me. For a moment, everything was still, and then I ran. I ran to him, feet slipping in the mud, tears streaming down my face. I threw my arms around him, burying my face against his chest. His arms came around me, holding me tight. Warm, safe, alive. We stood there in the yard that smelled of smoke and blood and rain. We stood there as the wind swept the last of the storm clouds away, as the sun broke through, lighting the mountains in gold. I pulled back, looking up at him. His eyes were tired, but they were alive. "It's over," I whispered. He nodded, "Yeah." And for the first time in a long time, I let myself believe it. That day in the mud and the blood and the quiet, I learned something. Sometimes the world is cruel. Sometimes it takes everything from you. But sometimes you find someone who will stand with you, who will fight for you, who will remind you that hope is worth holding on to. And sometimes that's enough. There's something about the Wild West that strips a person down to who they really are. The wind, the dust, the endless sky, those things don't care about your name or your past. They don't care what you're running from. Out here, the world will either break you or it will build you into something stronger. And sometimes you don't know which it's doing until you've survived it. When I think about Malachi, standing alone with that rifle, facing down men who thought they owned everything they touched, I see more than a gunfight in the mud. I see choice. I see a man who had every reason to shut the door and let the world destroy itself. But he didn't. We live in a world where it's easier to look away, to say, "That's not my problem," to convince ourselves we're too small to make a difference. But out there, in that cabin in the storm, Malachi reminded me, and maybe he'll remind you too, that sometimes all it takes to change everything is the courage to stand, even when your hands are shaking, even when your knees feel weak, even when fear whispers that you should walk away. Because the truth is, there will always be people like Clayton Voss. People who think they can take whatever they want. People who think power and fear are enough to control everyone around them. But there will also always be people like Malachi. People who believe that protecting what's good is worth the risk. People who will open their door when someone is banging on it in the middle of the storm, begging for help. People who will say, "Let them try," when the world comes to break you. I don't know what storms you're facing. I don't know what you're running from or what you've survived to get here. But I know this. You are not powerless. Your choices matter. Your willingness to stand matters. Sometimes it's not about fighting off bandits or facing down men with guns. Sometimes it's about showing up for your family, even when it's hard. Sometimes it's about speaking up when you see something wrong, even if your voice shakes. Sometimes it's about choosing kindness when the world tells you to look the other way. Malachi wasn't looking to be a hero. He was just a man who had lost faith in the world, trying to survive one quiet day at a time. And yet, when the moment came, he chose to fight. And that choice changed everything, not just for him, but for me, and for everyone who would have been hurt if he hadn't stood his ground. The world will test you. It will push you to your knees. It will tell you that you can't make a difference, and you will feel small. But let me tell you something. Even small lights can break the darkness. Even a single voice can change a story. Even a single act of courage can ripple out farther than you will ever know. If you've listened this far, maybe there's a part of you that's tired of running. Maybe you're ready to stand. Maybe you're ready to believe that hope, even in a broken world, is worth holding on to. If that's you, I want you to remember something. You don't have to do it alone, because out here, in this big, wild, often cruel world, there are still people worth fighting for. People worth protecting. People who will stand with you if you choose to stand. And maybe that's what courage really is. Not the absence of fear, not the promise of victory, but the decision to stand up, even when you're scared. To hold the line, even when you don't know what tomorrow will bring. To protect what matters, even when it would be easier to walk away. I used to think I was alone. I used to think the world was too dark to be worth saving. But then a stranger opened his door for me in the middle of the storm, and everything changed. Maybe it's your turn to open your door for someone. Maybe it's your turn to stand. If this story moved you, if you believe there are still people worth fighting for, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. Here, we share stories of the Wild West that aren't just about gunfights and dust, but about courage, sacrifice, and hope. Stories that remind us that even in a hard world, there are moments of goodness worth protecting. If you're ready to walk this road with us, click subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story. And if you're willing, leave a comment below. What would you stand for? Who would you protect? Because your story matters. Your voice matters. And your choice to stand might just change someone's world. Thank you for spending this time with us. Thank you for believing, even for a moment, that hope is worth fighting for. We'll see you in the next story.